you're new to sewing, or even if you've been at it for some time and you just fancy a quick and easy confidence boosting project, here are 5 patterns that I absolutely loved when I first started sewing, and honestly they still get quite a bit of use now. So if you're new here, I'm Sally and this is my channel Made by Sally, where I talk all about sewing and making clothes, with sometimes a little bit of knitting and crochet mixed in too. So in today's video I'm going to be sharing 5 great sewing patterns that I would highly recommend for beginners. These are patterns I went back to time and again when I was first starting out sewing, and I really feel like they taught me a lot, and I hope there'll be some inspiration for you in there too if you are a beginner, or as I say, even if you are someone that's been at it for quite some time. There might be some patterns in there that you may have forgotten or that you've never tried that you want to give a go. So let's get straight into it, shall we? And the first pattern I'm going to talk about is the Sew Over It Ultimate Shift Dress. You can tell how old this pattern is because it has one of the older vintage style Sew Over It pattern covers on, which I absolutely love and I really wish they still did. The dress version of this pattern was one of the first things I sewed up when I got back into dressmaking quite a few years ago now. I sewed one up from a viscose and I wore it to my friend's christening, and I think from that day onwards I was just hooked on sewing and I couldn't get enough of it, and I made this pattern quite a few times after I'd made that dress. So the reason I love this pattern so much is that it's relatively easy on the surface. There are no tricky fastenings to contend with, no zips, no buttonholes. The top actually pulls over your head and it has a small keyhole opening in the back, so no buttonholes or zips, just a little button and button loop to keep everything in place when you're wearing it. But even though this is a relatively easy sew, what I would say is there are enough details in there that you do actually learn something while you're sewing this pattern. So there are bust darts and there are neck facings, and if you are sewing the sleeveless version there's also a neck and armhole all in one facing, so quite a lot to learn. And then when you are feeling a little bit more confident you can progress onto putting in sleeves, and there's also a little frilled cap sleeve in there that you can try. So I think it's a really good one to play around with when you are learning and when you want to build on your skills. As I said, I've made many different versions of this pattern when I was a beginner. I think I made a couple of the dress versions, and I also made quite a lot of different versions of the top too, and it really gave me the opportunity to experiment with different fabrics and see how they felt. I played around with hacking the pattern slightly and just made a little peplum top from a double gauze fabric, and I've also used the capped frill sleeves of this one in many different ways as well. So yeah, I would really highly recommend this to beginners. It's a great place to get started, and you can sew this one up from quite a lot of different fabrics as well. So when you are starting out, it's always a good thing to maybe start with something a little bit more stable and easy to work with, such as a cotton or a cotton lawn maybe, and then progress to something a little bit more drapey perhaps, such as a viscose or a rayon or a silk. Pattern number 2 is this Simplicity pattern, Simplicity 1208. So when, again, I really got back into dressmaking, my children were quite small and I used to experiment with making clothing for them, particularly my daughter, who I spent quite a lot of time sewing dresses and tops for her while she was little. I know some people do struggle with making children's clothing because it is a little bit smaller and sometimes a little bit more fiddly than sewing adult clothing. But for me, I really enjoyed making the smaller garments, and I felt like it came with a little bit less risk in terms of wasting fabric while I was practicing, because obviously children's clothing use quite a lot less fabric than adult clothing does, don't they? So the reason I absolutely love this pattern again is that on the surface it's quite an easy sew, but it did teach me quite a lot along the way. So this is a dress with a lined bodice and it has a button up back, but the good thing about this pattern is that you don't need to make any buttonholes because the buttons are actually fastened with rouleau loops. So I didn't have any fiddly buttonholes to contend with or anything like that. I literally could make the bodice, which is fully lined. So again, that gave me a little bit more practice in terms of bagging out a lining for a bodice. And then I could just fix the buttons on and have them fasten with a little rouleau loop. And you can also use things like ribbon and things like that if you don't want to make your own rouleau loops, which can be quite fiddly. This pattern also taught me quite a lot about gathering, because there's quite a bit of gathering involved in this. And then you can either make it sleeveless or with sleeves. So when you're ready to progress and make a sleeve, then there is that option for you in this pattern. What I really love about this pattern as well, and what I love about most children's clothing, is that there's really room to be playful with these clothes. So this pattern actually includes options for these animal applique designs as well. So I made this little cat applique dress for my daughter when she was quite little, and I remember absolutely loving sewing that up. You can also make a bunny, which I haven't ever made, but I do think is really cute. I've made my daughter quite a few different versions of this dress. I've made the version with sleeves and without sleeves, and I've also experimented with lining the skirt and things like that as well. So it was a great pattern to play around with. Just to give you an idea of how well used this pattern was, this is how I've stored all of the pattern pieces in this very scruffy plastic wallet. I do appreciate that this pattern might only be relevant if you do have children in your life, but nonetheless I wanted to include it because it was a pattern that I came back to time and again as a beginner. Pattern number 3 is the Sew Over It Poppy playsuit. I don't have this pattern to hand because it is printed off as a PDF, but I will pop in all of the images so you can see what this playsuit looks like. So this again is another Sew Over It pattern, and I'm not ashamed to admit that when I did get back into dressmaking, I spent a lot of time using Sew Over It patterns and also obsessively watching their YouTube channel. I loved the time when Lisa Comfort was sharing all of her makes on her vlog. I really miss those days, but they were so inspiring to me as someone who is getting back into dressmaking, and I just found all of their patterns really easy to use. So I was actually really inspired to sew up this pattern as a beginner after I saw one of Lisa Comfort's versions. And don't get me wrong, I was pretty intimidated at first to sew this up because after all it does use quite a lot of fabric. It is quite a big voluminous jumpsuit, and especially if you make the trouser version you are using quite a lot of fabric. And of course as a beginner I think trousers are probably one of the most daunting items to sew, so I did feel a little bit scared trying this, I have to say. What I would say however though is the poppy playsuit is a surprisingly easy sew. Again, the bodice of this playsuit is really quick and easy to sew up, so it doesn't include any zips or buttons or anything like that. Like quite a few of Sew Over It patterns, it actually fastens at the back with a keyhole opening and a button and button loop. This playsuit also includes grown-on sleeves, and I do love a grown-on sleeve because it gives the illusion of wearing a sleeve. Your shoulders are covered, but you don't have any sleeves to fit in the round or any gathering to do or anything like that. So the bodice of this came together super quickly, and the neck is just finished with a facing too. So again, nice and easy. The trousers also are pretty easy to sew because they're nice and big, and because there is the elasticated waist and this is a jumpsuit which is generally quite sort of big and voluminous around your hips, there isn't a lot of fitting to do. So I would say this is a really good place to start if you do want to sort of start out trying trouser patterns. Jumpsuits are always very forgiving, I think, because everything is kind of gathered in at the waist and it's supposed to be quite floaty anyway. I really think this is one of those makes that looks far more confident to sew than it actually is. So it's a really good one to sort of show off once you've made it if you are a beginner, because I think people will probably look at it and assume that there's a lot of sewing and a lot of work involved, but actually the sewing process is on the whole pretty simple. So yeah, I made a few versions of this poppy playsuit when I was starting out again in sewing. I made a shorts version first because I wanted to sort of not waste too much fabric if anything went wrong. After that I actually made a culotte length version, and I also went on to make another shorts version with a button up front. So I'd seen this button up front hack again on Lisa Comfort's YouTube channel, and she kind of talked through how she did it, and I decided to purchase myself a reasonably cheap fabric and have a go. And I was so proud of myself when I actually sewed this button placket version. I absolutely loved it. But yeah, highly recommend the Poppy Playsuit by Sew Over It. I think it's one of their probably lesser known patterns, one of their older patterns, and not one that I tend to see around that much actually. So perhaps if you've never seen it before, it might be one that you might like to try. So moving on to pattern number 4, and I have included a jersey sewing pattern. This is the Kirsten Tee by Maria Denmark. So this is a really simple t-shirt sewing pattern. It features quite a wide boat neck style. grown on sleeves again, which I absolutely love, and it has a nice simple sort of fitted style body with a slightly curved hem. So the boat neckline is actually finished with either ribbing or binding, and you can make that from the fabric that you're using. Or if you want to make the process even easier, the pattern does suggest that you can even use shop bought knit binding, so that would make things even speedier. Again, what I love about this pattern is the grown on sleeves. So with this t-shirt there are no sleeves to fit in. There's just a slight grown on cap sleeve which you turn under and then either zigzag to finish or twin needle if you're feeling adventurous. I really love the neckline on this pattern, and I think this kind of style is great for a beginner because you don't have any of the sort of stretching in of a neckband to do. So if you are a beginner, it's so much easier to sew a wider neckline like this. You don't have to bother sort of stretching and quartering and pinning and tacking like you would with a crew neck t-shirt, and I think it's a great way to practice sewing with knit fabrics. For my first version of this pattern, I was actually feeling super adventurous, obviously, because I went for a viscose jersey with quite a wide stripe on it. But it did give me a good chance to practice sewing with that fabric and also stripe matching on something that was a relatively easy style pattern. But if you are a beginner and you fancy trying this pattern, I would perhaps recommend starting with a fabric that's a little bit more stable than the one I use, such as a cotton jersey or even a French terry. I forgot to mention as well actually that this is a free pattern, so if you pop over to the Maria Denmark website you can actually subscribe to the newsletter and download this pattern for free. So again, no cost if you just want to practice sewing with jerseys. I think this t-shirt would make a really great wardrobe staple actually for autumn and winter time. It would be great for layering under knits and jumpers and things like that, so I might just have to revisit this one this autumn. Pattern number 5 is the Indigo Dress by Tilly and the Buttons. So I'm sure we all already know how amazing Tilly's patterns are for beginners. They always really hold your hand the whole way through, don't they? And the instructions and the illustrations are always really helpful. So I do always love to recommend Tilly and the Buttons patterns for anyone who might be starting out in their sewing journey. So the Indigo pattern is a really simple style smock dress. Again, it just pulls on over your head, so no tricky fastenings, no zips, no buttonholes or anything like that, just a simple all-in-one neck facing. Then there are various different ways that you can finish the bodice. You can either have a nice gathered sort of smock style top, or you can make it into a nice mini dress for autumn winter time, which looks great with tights and boots. There are also different ways that you can finish the sleeves with this one, so you can have a nice straight sleeve if you just want something nice and simple, or the pattern does include a fluted sleeve as well, so again you can play around with gathering and add in pretty details if you're feeling more confident. I always think a smock style dress is a great place to start if you are someone who's feeling a little bit nervous about sewing a dress for the first time. There's often less fitting involved with a smock style dress. They are essentially designed to be oversized, aren't they? So there's not so much bother about whether the dress fits around the bust or the hips or anything like that. So what I love about this pattern as well is that it's a great one for growing with you as you do become more confident in your sewing skills. The sleeves do obviously make this pattern slightly more complicated perhaps than other patterns that I've shared in this video, but I think when you are building on your skills, these nice sort of straight style sleeves are always a great place to start. And again, because Tilly's instructions are so great, I've often found in the past that actually using her patterns, I found it really easy to sort of practice and learn new skills because they are so comprehensive and easy to follow. The Indigo pattern does actually now have an add-on pack, so once you've mastered the original pattern in this one, you can go on to make different styles of this dress and top, such as a button-up placket at the back. And there are also options for puff sleeves and adding an extra tier to make this into a midi dress as well. So I've actually made a couple of versions of this pattern as it is. I've experimented with the gathered flute sleeve and I've just made a version with the straight sleeve too. But what I found with this pattern was that once I was feeling more confident and adventurous in my sewing, I was able to use it to sort of play around and pattern hack. So if you have followed me for quite some time, you'll know that I've made various different dresses just using the bodice part of this pattern and attaching various different skirt pieces. So I would say that once you're feeling confident and you've mastered your sewing to a certain level, this is a really great pattern to play around with and pattern hack and sort of chop and change things and add bits on. It's a really great basis, I think, for making lots of different dresses and tops. So yeah, this is a very well used pattern in my pattern collection, and one that I sewed quite a lot again in my beginning sewing days. So I really wanted to include it in this pattern roundup for today. So that brings me to the end of today's 5 pattern roundup. I could have included a few more patterns, so if you would like a part 2 of this video, then please do let me know in the comments below. But I really hope it's been helpful. It was really nice to go back through my own sewing archives actually and just have a think about the patterns that really did shape my own sewing journey, and it was great to look at them again and think about how I might want to revisit them now that I do feel more confident in my sewing. So please do let me know in the comments what your favourite patterns were as a beginner, if you are a more advanced sewer. And if you are a beginner just starting out, please do let me know in the comments as well if any of these have given you the inspiration to bite the bullet and get started. I'd love to know. If you have enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Subscribing really does help me out with the YouTube algorithm, and of course it just helps you to be notified whenever I do post a new sewing video. You can also follow me over on Instagram at Made by Sally Gauntlet, and if you're interested in supporting me financially, I do have a Patreon as well where I share extra videos, tips and tricks, all for around the price of a coffee every month. And I'll just pop that link below as well if you are interested in checking that out. Thanks so much for joining me today, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll look forward to catching up with you again next Sunday. Take care. Bye.